Give me.
And welcome everybody to AM Byte. Welcome to AB Live. For those of you on audio watching, whether it's YouTube or Rockfin, you just saw 7 influential Gnostic women. There are actually more, but it's always good to, when doing a show, a theme of the goddess, which we've done so many, to show one of the great characteristics of Gnosticism is that many of the founders of the many sects were women, and women were always part of the congregation. They were always leaders. So it's good to know. For those of you who will be listening in audio, I will have a clip about the power, beauty, and danger that is nature, that double-edged sword that is nature, because this is definitely keeping with theme of this show, which I feel was very destined, as I will relate later. But first, we want to welcome our guest. Very excited to have Dr. Carla Ionescu, and she will be discussing a lot about Artemis, including her great book, which I really enjoyed, She Who Hunts. Carla, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm very excited to talk about Artemis and the book and, well, just Artemis overall, wherever she takes us tonight.
So
But
am
yeah.
I. So am I. So am I. And I can't think of anybody better because I would assume, like me, you love scholarship, but you also love the aesthetic and the spirituality of these gods.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yes. Yes.
And it's always nice to talk. I mean, for example, one of my favorite guests and my friend April DeConnick, head of Rice University Religious Studies, great scholar in Gnosticism, but she's also you might say, a believer in these things. So it
Yes.
really helps.
Yes.
And with us too, we've got a man, a scholar, and a gentleman. We've got the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm just fine this evening. Guess we're going from archons to archers, right?
We
So
are
I
indeed.
always love all the Greek gods and so forth. And Artemis is very interesting. You know, they all have such interesting personalities, don't they? That's the
Yes.
cool thing about the Greek gods. There's have loaded with personality.
Yes.
And it's almost like we're just getting to know them, right, Carla? It
Yes.
seems like
Yes.
the world had these sort of caricature views of these Greek gods of
Yes.
they represented the weather, and Dionysus was this fat drunk, and Eros was this cute baby with his little baby butt shooting arrows, and Hermes was this sort of geeky guy with tennis shoes. But and Artemis, of course, is just
Yes.
this sort of surly huntress and Apollo's little sister. But we've
Yes.
missed it, don't you think?
Yes. Yes. I love the fact that there's a revival going on. It feels like it's picking up speed, more and more people are talking about them. It's almost like they're coming back to life. There's definitely a revival of them all. And the complexities of them all, I think, is really what's fascinating, that they're less cartoony. Uh, right?
Yeah, like Disney's Hercules, or well,
Right.
we've all known the cartoons or the show Hercules, and they're
Right.
just kind of basic, silly, one-dimensional.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
no more, no more. And I think it's a very important time for this. And yes, I wanted to share with the audience about this show. I was already following you on Instagram because I always just thought your stuff was just so cool. But about 2 months ago, Carla, and during the spring, I have this very long Persephone like adoration. And for some reason, I tie her to Elizabeth Fraser of Cocteau Twins. It's complicated, but it works for me. And it was a great sort of Persephone spring. But then these things started happening soon as summer was coming and the solstice. And a guest would come on with a book called Artemis. I would be at my daughter's ballet recital and open the program to be like Artemis Crafts. I would open a book and search for something like about the Gnostics, and oh my God, Artemis. And more every time I turned around, it was just Artemis. Even things like we live by the preserves and there's lots of deer, but suddenly deer were coming around the house, which they never do to eat. I guess I wasn't cutting the grass or whatever it was, but
What?
I was like, it's so easy to see deer now. And of course I immediately said, who's in charge of deer? Then I find out news that for the first time in generations, brown bears have made their way down to northern Illinois. And of course, I'm like, who's in charge of brown bears? And over and over, and I kept. Then I started having dreams and strange ideas, like I decided I started this ritual just out of nowhere. I would go outside and walk with the flashlight off into the trails in the woods. And during June, you have the fireflies coming. So the entire woods is lit up with fireflies. It's the most beautiful. It's like Christmas. It's better than Christmas. And on top, I would see the full moon just going down. And I kept thinking, oh my God, Artemis. Artemis is like, this is her beauty. But of course, this is her danger, tripping over things, hearing coyotes and like rushing back. But and so I know whatever level of reality you choose, whether you think the gods are cosmic energies, archetypal images, interior processes of the soul, or they're literal, whatever works for you works for you. I'm not going to judge, but I know when you have syncs, and I know when a deity calls, whether it's in your mind or not, you better lean into it because there is something important or you have some task to do, because the alternative I've learned of not listening to the gods is damage. Something bad's going to happen, something. So therefore suddenly I was like, I've got to reach out to Carla and we have to do this interview, or I'm not going to mess around. Of all the deities in my head, the one that I fear more than Cthulhu or the demiurge or Zeus. I fear Artemis more than anything, probably because I've lived in nature in the country for so long. So, what do you
Yes.
think? Yeah, she is somebody to fear.
It's funny that you say that because I feel the same way in the sense that I mean for me it's been a long time coming that I felt this calling and calling and calling, but recently it's like yeah, it's like there are more and more people that are saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm having this connection to her
Mhm.
or I'm having this dream or whatever." And so I'm really starting to think that she's really purposely entering the realm again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because so many people so when I was writing my PhD, no one else was talking about her, even in my own circle in a sense. Well, it was academic circle, right? And
Mhm.
actually the reason that it was easy for me to go with her was because no one was really talking about her in academe. No one was really studying her. You know, she was always relegated to this little virgin huntress, you know? And so that really opened up the path for me to do the work. But there was no one to, classicists are kind of like, oh, Artemis, she's just like a young girl hunting in the woods. And so it was very difficult to have conversations where I'm like, listen, I'm finding all the stuff about this goddess, and she's really fierce. That's a good word for her, right? I mean, that's a modern
Mhm.
word, but she's really fierce, and she's really, she's had this massive following, and her following is sometimes disturbing and sometimes intense, and she's not a goddess to mess with. And so it was really hard to like it started to feel almost like I was in a bit of like a vacuum by myself. And then once I published the book, I think because of that, people were more like, oh, well, I've loved Artemis for this long. And oh, I've
Mm.
connected with her for this long. And oh my God, I've been interested in her since whatever, and then like other Wiccans and witches and goddess worshippers kind of came out of the woodwork and were like, or maybe they were already there and I came out of the woodwork, you know what I mean? And they were like, yeah, she's connected to me for a while. And I thought, oh, I found people that like get it, so that was very exciting, very exciting.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, on this show, I've talked a lot, and again, it's not really my ideas. It's a lot of Jungians and others about how we live in I call it the age of Hermes, because we are living in an age of transition and an age where the old ways are falling apart, where we are going through a doorway, and Hermes is the god of doorways. We're living in a very trickster age where everybody's confused. Nobody knows what the future is. The past is finally coming back, but we're still figuring it out. It's just the perfect Hermes age, alchemical. But also, I started realizing you have to connect Hermes to Hecate, because when you read the Odyssey and others, Hecate and Hermes they're almost like the flip side of the coin, helpers of mankind, but very dangerous gods to mess with.
Yes.
And you brought, yeah. And then suddenly I said, well, Artemis has to be part of this. And of course, you mentioned nobody really did any work. I think Sorita Deste has been doing
Yes,
some
I'm
work
talking to
on.
her tomorrow. I'm so excited. Yes,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. Yeah.
She's done great work, but obviously Hecate is her main
Yes.
babe, if you would.
Yes.
So I said Artemis has to be part of this, especially if we as a species want to survive intact or sane for this next whatever's on the other side of the door. I
Yeah.
think we'll need Artemis for all her perils and opportunities.
Agreed. Agreed. And I call her often a goddess of transitions, and that's funny
Mhm.
that you say that we're in this transition period, and maybe that's why she's appearing more and more to more and more people. Because I do find that she shows up, or she remains, or she becomes the focus in transition periods. And so this is a transition period for us for sure. And so yeah, she's in full force for sure. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Please heed our words, people, and let us know if you have your own sinks or dreams. And I think, speaking of, why don't we talk about her history? Because I feel reading your book that this is not her first rodeo, if you would, but she goes back farther than Greece, and she was a very powerful being in very old times. And then
Yes.
civilization went through a transition out of the Bronze Age into the Hellenistic period, and
Yeah.
she still was the top goddess, right? That's people, she's been kind of denigrated as, like we were talking before the show, Apollo is like this popular jock and good looking guy, and all the girls are never, ooh, Apollo. And Artemis has been relegated as sort of like, yeah, she's a jock too, but she's kind of quiet in the background. That's how it's been in history. But she was in the last transition, she really is the most important goddess.
I would say so. I mean, so I argue that she is the most important goddess out of the entire pantheon, but that's my bias, right? My own bias. But I would say, I mean, many of the Olympic goddesses survived, right, into the Greek pantheon and then became sort of married off and all that kind of stuff. Artemis, for sure, we can trace her back to Neolithic times and perhaps pre-Neolithic. It depends, because if we hook her to the mistress of animals, we can go back 5,000-6,000 years as far as that imagery shows up. And the mistress of animals imagery shows up, even pre-Minoan period. Certainly it's in the Minoan period. And then she even has roots in like Egypt and Neath and the double axe, for example, some of her weapons. So I would say that she is one of the archaic divinities, if we could use that word. So she predates the Olympians and was already, but maybe not but the name Artemis is already a little bit complex because it's not Greek, right? But even without a name, if we call her just Potniatheron or the mistress of animals, she can go back, 2,000 years before the Greeks. And so then what do? You have this goddess of the wild, of animals, powerful deity, and great worship, many followers, expansive geography. And then, as we move more into the Greek period, the Bronze Age, and then the Hellenistic Age, I think that she was so powerful, as were some of the others, that, the Greeks adapted them, obviously, but then they gave them husbands. And in the case of Artemis, they tried to give her a twin brother, an annoying twin brother that they made her help give birth to. But even with the twin brother, she is one of the only goddesses that remains independent, right? Like she's really, what we would call sovereign. So she has no one that she has to listen to, really, like Hera is the wife, so she's got to put up with Zeus, and Aphrodite has to put up with both Hephaestus and Mars. Sorry, I'm mixing the names in here. And Ares. Who else? Demeter's all right, but she's a very suffering mother. She's got the responsibility of Persephone. Athena's got the responsibility of the entire military, right? And so Artemis is the only one that remains free to roam the woods, kill people like she likes, save people like she likes. She's not literally tied to a man in the sense that she's not married off, nor is she in charge of a military. She has her brother, but it's not really like a tied relationship. Yeah, she hangs out with her nymphs. She takes care of her animals. She has cities and worshipers, and people build great temples to her, and she just has a great time. Like she maintains that sense of independence,
Yeah, that is true.
It's her job.
The adventures of Apollo and Artemis remind me sort of like Cersei and Jaime Lannister. They're a bit twisted when they're together. They're not right, but then again, that's me judging as a moral human being nature, which I've learned it's complete folly. But can we say that Artemis is perhaps a continuation or the upgrade or reboot of the great mother Kybele, or you have these ancient goddesses like Anat or Sekhmet, these very violent, sexually hungry, destructive, but very fun to hang out with if you survive. They'll go to the underworld and kill death if, just for the honor of their man or something. Can we say that she is the next iteration of this?
I could say she's the Greek iteration of that for sure. If we're talking about Sekhmet, that is a very aggressive divinity. And I don't know if Artemis could carry that entire mantle, but certainly I think that she carries the mantle of um, the enforcer, in the way that Sekhmet does for the Greeks, in the
Mhm.
sense of like when she kills Niobe's children, when she goes after people that hurt her mom, when Hera asks her to kill people or whoever, Artemis and Apollo, but Artemis is there and ready, and she is really an enforcer in that way. She slays people and doesn't feel anything about it. I would say similarly within that, I would certainly say Kybele, especially for Artemis of Ephesus. In fact, there's a great argument that Artemis of Ephesus that has the bulbs on her chest,
Mhm.
which I think are beehives, but some people associate with breasts, that is a direct connection to Kybele, which is often referred to or often, described as the many-breasted. So yeah, I would say that and of course, Artemis is tied to Hecate. She's one of the chthonic goddesses. She carries torches. And of course, that also connects her to Persephone. One of my favorite images of Artemis is at the Temple of Demeter in Eleusis with Persephone, and she stands beside them carrying two torches as light bearer, And
Mm.
so that's a really powerful image because she's one of the two other very powerful divinities. Demeter is extremely powerful in the Greek world, and Persephone, of course, also. And here is Artemis holding torches as the light bringer, as the sort of morning star, It's Artemis Phosphorus, right? Um, so I don't know why she has been underestimated by modern classicists. To be fair, I think she didn't serve a purpose for them. Like she's not a war goddess, she's not a sex goddess, she's not a mother goddess. And so I think a lot of the early classes were like, well, what does she serve for us?
We got to put her some, yeah, Western scholars. We got to categorize her, put her somewhere. Everybody has a job in this hierarchical Western
Exactly.
society, but
Well, she doesn't like guys either, right? She has not
No,
not much use for men.
no,
So, and most of the scholars are men. So, I mean,
that's
even
right.
I feel it. Like, what do I want to be
well, she was,
interested in
yeah, and
her
she's
for?
confused with the goddess of chastity, which, of course, both men and women in the West are like, well, who needs that? We have the Virgin Mary, and men can go to the priesthood. So, what's the point in chastity? But
Yes, yes.
so,
Yeah, so I don't think that she was I don't think that she was seen as a value to the early classicists. But I think
mm,
that now that we're entering the sort of sacred feminine or reviving the sacred feminine or all those kinds of things, men and women are finding the value in Artemis now, in that wildness and that sovereignty and that fierceness, etc., in nature, and being free from the system or the matrix or whatever you want to call it.
well
Yeah.
said. No, and yeah, and seeing again with me, it's seeing nature for what it is. It's that myth of Actaeon. I understand it perfectly because he sees Artemis bathing naked, but
Yes.
then he gets turned into a deer and his own dog. So I'm like, well, of course, if you want to see nature naked, it's beautiful, but it's going to kill you. I'm
That's
sorry,
right.
nature's going to kill you. And all the things you think you've domesticated, all the science and technology, the dogs, they will turn on you because nature has a way of just, clearing things out. We humans are ants, it will clear us out. So to me, that's so powerful. And seeing nature, not like, these hippies, like, oh, it's beautiful. It's like, no, it's also terrible. It's terrible too, right?
Yes, yes, I love that. I love that actually. I love that interpretation of Actaeon because I think that's absolutely right. Like the consequences of being in nature is that sometimes nature is cruel, and it's not going to go, "Oh yeah, you care about the trees." Yeah, well, okay. You know.
Yeah,
And
she
that's why
represents nature naked at its
yes.
purest, undistilled essence.
Yes. And there's also an unapologetic aspect of hers in the sense of like when she curses Actaeon, there's no remorse, there's no, you know what I mean? Like this is the consequences of your actions, just like in nature. And that's all there is, So there isn't a big like, oh my goodness, was it fair? Was it just? Do we need to go to court about it? Do we have to have, Athena sitting there judging the scales? No,
Yeah.
her decision is swift. He's transformed. the rest is
Yeah,
mythology.
it's like when my cat comes to my bed, it brings in a dead snake. We're not going to argue morality. This is nature. There's no ambiguity. Death, die, or survive. It's simple as
That's
that.
right. Oh my God. Do you know how many times I've talked to my cat when they bring a bird and I'm like, why? What do you
Yes,
do?
yes, yes.
You
You
know,
know,
why?
and the truth is that they're doing it for you. They're bringing you an offer. You are Artemis to them. They're bringing you a
I was just thinking
sacrifice.
that. Yeah.
They're trying to be nice.
That's the devastating part. They kind of look at you like, say thank you, human.
We'll spare you.
Yeah.
Oh, it's something else. So I think another reason, Carla, and let me know your thoughts. Your book deals with it. Is that classicists miss it because they had this sort of very terrible view that gods represented something, the weather, motherhood. But as we found out, even though there's this new movement that wants to say that mystery religions never existed, just like there's a movement that want to say that Gnosticism never existed. But I think there were certain gods who were not just representing something. There were gods of the liminal place, the inner journey, the place of ultimate boundaries where human consciousness and emotion could go. And obviously, some of these gods are, you see, Dionysus, Persephone, and wouldn't Artemis would fall into that category. That's why she was so universal and spread out, because she really represented salvation, the best part of it, potential, the places where the mind, only the soul can go.
Yes. Yes. I think so. She's definitely a goddess of mystery. And in fact, although we have some information, I mean, I've collected information for this book, especially, for example, at Broron, of all of the bear, for example, imagery, and then the bear. We really only have like Aeschylus's play. One of the things that's really almost like a little bit frustrating is that her priestesses, and this goes for many other goddesses, but especially for her and Demeter, there was like a silence. It was an oral tradition that was not written down. So no one actually, so I used to ask myself when I first started studying, like, what does the bear have to do with Broron? Like, what does Artemis have to do with the bears? I mean, there weren't that many bears in Greece. I mean, there are some now in northern Greece, and there were back then. But there is this sort of mystery of the bear. Suddenly there's a bear, and Broron is just outside of Athens. And it's a huge bear cult. So huge that the young women were calling themselves bears, acting like bears. And they would go through this ritual at the point of transition between young women to like married women. So around 12 to 14, when they first get their menstruation, where they would shed the bear or shed the wildness. So they would wear, sometimes there are stories in which they actually wore bear outfit, bear furs. A lot of the stories or the plays talk about them wearing yellow saffron robes. That's the more popular one. And they would go through a ritual, which we do not know what it is. It is not written anywhere. But all we know is that they would shed their wildness. I don't know what that means, like literally how they did that. And then once they passed through this ritual, they would be ready for marriage. So in one way, it kind of breaks my heart, because it's like, no one should shed their wildness. You should keep it. In another part, though, we don't know if they shed their wildness, because this is just one male playwright who says so. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps this is his fantasy. That's what they did. We don't know, right? He doesn't leave us notes.
Bear porn.
Yeah. It's like we don't know. It's like that's his interpretation. We do know that they did, like, we have a little bear of Broron. Like, we do have artifacts that are like bear and Artemis is definitely connected. And we have paintings on vases of girls dancing around the altars, and there's this sort of idea. But there's a lot of mystery around what did it involve, and so I think, and there's a lot of her temples in which there's mysteries around what was involved. And perhaps in part that's because it was a lot of women's rituals, like birth rituals, pregnancy rituals, menstruation rituals, like let's say bleeding rituals, or organic bio rituals, if we can call them that. And women, if they did write something down, we don't have it, right? So there's a lot of mystery around that in part. But also, I think a lot of it was secretive on purpose. I think that there was a lot of like, this is not something we talk about outside the temple, you know?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and I forgot to tell you the other day, I did do an Artemis ritual. I was out in the woods. I made a little fire and I did my sacrifice. But of course, I can't tell you. It's a mystery. But don't worry, no animals. There were no animals were involved. I did sacrifice something, but it was
No
something
bears were
else.
harmed during this ritual.
No bears. I would have been running back to the house.
No bears
That-
harmed you during this
yeah,
ritual.
that's more
That you
important.
do were the sacrifice.
Yeah, I'd be the sacrifice to the
But she
goddess.
did have that bloody ritual. I don't know if you remember in the book of the Spartans with the bloody rituals,
Oh, that was yeah. Tell the audience
right?
that's the one that stayed with me for
And,
days.
and and so you know how many times I've seen 300 or other Spartan movies, and not ever has anyone pointed out in the films. And I mean, I know I have high expectations for films, but not ever has anyone pointed out that Spartans worshipped Artemis. Like,
Mm.
there is an entire temple in Sparta. Actually, I had pictures of it, but many years ago. And I mean, there's not much left of it, but there was a huge temple or site in Sparta. And yeah, this is where they used to do this bloody rituals. And so this is all men, right? So this is a male rituals, and it would happen once a year. Sometimes that people say once every 4 years, depends who you read. But basically, what they did is there would be a priestess of Artemis standing in the middle. So let's say it's a theater, yeah, a nice theater packed with everybody in town, and all the young men around 13 or 14 years old gather in the center of the theater. A priestess stands in the middle of these young men holding an effigy of Artemis. So some people say it was just a wooden structure. Some people say it was a cult statue, whatever it was. And these young men have these whips with little nails on them. Yeah. And they begin to walk around the priestess and flay themselves with these whips so that their blood sprays onto the priestess. Could you
Mm.
imagine this? Plus the cult statue, okay? Because obviously the priestess is holding her. And they would do this until last man standing. Yeah. So first man that falls down, first young man, I mean, that's already a shame to the family. Everybody's watching it. If you're like in the top 10, I imagine that's probably pretty good. Last man standing gets the honor of, having survived this trial to the goddess. And by the end of this, sometimes like Pausanias tells us that sometimes the priestess would call it off. So if it gets really super, so she would tell the audience when Artemis has received enough blood. Basically, it was when the statue was soaked in blood. But sometimes some scholars say that they would go right to the end when there was only a few of the boys standing. That this was like a feat of strength, how much can you bleed for this guy? I mean, this is a really bloody ritual. And then people, of course, would eat afterwards, and there'd be a festival and a party and all this kind of stuff. But it's this would make a great HBO film.
It would be great, and like 300 or something like that. That was actually my ritual, Carla, but I did it once and I passed out. So. I woke up, the priest of Artemis was like kicking me in the face. You loser. No,
You're not worthy.
Yeah, one. We couldn't take just one. What happened to men? But yeah, and there was the other one too, which was also stayed in my head, where they would burn all these animals, right, in one place, and from all these different animals for Artemis, and if the animal tried to escape, they would just throw it back in.
Yes.
That one also was disturbing.
Yes. She really likes her bloody rituals. She's not a goddess that you worship lightly. I've had a few friends who have done retreats, and they've said, we've decided to do Artemis as sort of the center of our weekend. And then they would, later on, they would call me and be like, that was a really intense, powerful weekend. Everybody was acting really weird, and I'm like, yeah, so this is not a goddess that you want to call on lightly, because she, she's fierce. Like, she is, you dedicate yourself to her, and you like, look at Callisto, and I mean, all of these lots of other of her nymphs or entourage who, if they did not obey, she would just slay them or yeah, she's not she's
She's
not like a
intense.
loving mommy kind of goddess.
And you're
No,
wondering
no.
why people didn't like her.
Maybe, maybe,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah, yeah. Well, it
maybe.
But,
is. I mean, go ahead.
Huntress, though, hunters
Yeah,
loved her, right?
yeah.
Hunters, she was the goddess of the hunt. And really, that's, I think, the center of all of this, don't you think?
It's fascinating because she begins as a mistress of animals and a goddess of the wild. So according to the Greeks, and this is later, so this is later, she demands from Zeus that he gives her all the forest, that he gives her all the wild, that he gives her all these nymphs, that he leaves her alone, that he never bothers her again. As a child, she sits on, according to Callimachus, she sits on his lap and goes, "So I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want that." And Zeus goes, "Okay, sure." And so it's fascinating to me that she becomes a hunter goddess, from a mistress of animals to the hunt. And I think that's more about like a social structure that kind of changed over time, and hunting became so primary, because she's very protective of animals, and yet she hunts animals, right? And I mean, as hunters know, you respect animals, and most hunters, you respect them and you eat them. There's that symbiotic relationship.
Right,
But I
right.
think that's what makes her really unique, is because she slays the very things she protects, if she wants or if she must.
Yeah, similar to Native Americans, in the North American South, in the Western Hemisphere, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she's complex. I mean, there's so many of her titles: death dealer, mother, healer,
Yeah.
savior. I liked the strangled goddess.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get into that story in a little bit, but she's so multidimensional. But again, I think she's really talking about something visceral and primordial in each person, like Dionysus, a place where
Yeah.
reason doesn't exist. It's just pure ecstasy, pure energy, as close as we can get to that primordial soup or whatever you want to talk, which all of us kind of crave to go back to or experience. So,
Yeah, I don't get the mother thing, by the way. That's kind of seems paradoxical, but
well, didn't you
maybe.
say she suckles all of her worshippers?
Well, so some people say that. So the mother thing is fascinating because she helps. So she's often seen as a goddess of childbirth. Uh, and that comes from goddesses that predate her, like Elethea and Dictina, sometimes
Mm.
Britomartis. So there's other goddesses that were goddesses of childbirth. And for some reason, she's given this association because she helps to birth Apollo. And so she sort of absorbs those pre-goddesses, takes on this role, and becomes the protector of women, of children, of childbirth, this kind of stuff. And so in that way, she is the mother without birthing a child herself. Do you know what I'm saying? So she plays the role of helping with birth and helping raise children and helping protect all the
A
mother
midwife.
things. Yeah, except the birthing part. She herself never has a child. She's not interested in that. But she is the protector of children. That is not even, Hera or Aphrodite or any other goddess, or Demeter, who have deity or children. None of them are the protector of children. Artemis is. So this is what shows me like how complex she is as a divinity, because she's so multi-bodied, multifaceted, you know and that's from the bottom up, in the sense that her followers give her those responsibilities, give her those titles, build those temples to her, create those rituals. And so there must have been something in the community that they felt connected to her, in order for them to give her those names and build those temples and those rituals.
Yeah, well, the mothers of the children must have appreciated her for protecting their children. So
Absolutely.
there's an allegiance right there, right?
Absolutely. And they would give, like, there are stories in which they would give up their placenta to her. There are stories they used to wear like a girdle sometimes after birth, to carry the afterbirth. So once they were done with that, they would go and offer that to Artemis. There's lots of stories of mothers. There are children who give up their toys to Artemis for protection, or mothers who give them children's toys. a very deep connections between mothers and her. There's a little bit of a missing link there as to why and when that happened. Some people say comes from this idea of the mother bear, because the bear mother has a long history, you know, even in Neolithic times as a mother figure, because she's associated with the bear. So there's a missing link there. There's a little bit of like, how did we get from here to here?
Yeah.
But we know that her popularity as protector of children is
That's
undeniable.
weird too, because bears are not that swift, right? But Artemis is like very swift of foot.
I don't know. A grizzly can go 30, 35 miles an hour.
Really?
So yeah, polar. Yeah, the bears are amazingly fast. Climb up tree. I mean, yeah. Never try to outrun a bear.
Maybe
If
that's
I
the
see one
explanation.
tonight, I am playing dead. It's like, but and the other thing too, yeah, and we'll get to your super chats. Yeah, I should have mentioned, please super chat so we can see you. Good to see everybody there. Altrusian Grace Media, but Matt, Graham, I think I saw Occult Fan. I see Chester. Everybody, good to see you, and I love your conversations there. But if you have a question, we'll get to them soon. Your super chat. But I wanted to ask you, Carla, before we get into that, the idea of a fighting woman. Obviously, the Greeks, whatever they are, they're one of the most misogynistic cultures ever. It's like, but the other big player in those days was the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was probably a lot more level. In fact, women did go in the battlefield. There were archers. Queen Tomiris, destroyed Cyrus the Great. I mean, women were fierce fighters. In fact, the term Amazon, I believe, comes from the Greeks freaking out over these women shooting arrows at them. Could Artemis have a connection to this, or maybe some of the Persian goddesses like the Gorgons or Satana or any of those?
So absolutely. So okay. So Artemis definitely has roots in Amazon culture, and in fact, Pausanias tells us that Amazons built her first temples, and so that Amazons came down to Greece or came up into Greece, in the area of Greece, the region of Greece, and that they built some of her first temples. So there is an absolute connection between Artemis and warrior women, certainly archer women, which was a lot of women. And so I think that there is something, the Greeks are really fascinating because they really disliked women in some ways. But
they love
really,
their god. They're very obedient to their goddesses.
I mean, it's a really interesting psychology that they, so that they, especially the Athenians, they disliked women in some ways, in the sense of like they didn't see them as equals, but they loved to to gain street cred by defeating an Amazon. That there is something about Amazon women that they saw as honor. There's honor in defeating an Amazon woman. So, and they were fascinated and they fantasized about, so much of their art is about Greek men overcoming Amazon women. And so I think maybe Artemis, again, she kind of slipped through the cracks there, and maintained that warrior female, I don't know, character. But I guess in a way she was not threatening to Greek authority in that way,
Yeah, maybe she was out more in the country, like Dionysus. Yeah. She was more of the common people outside of the town square, somewhere on the margin.
The common people's goddess, but even the Spartans. I mean, great warriors had women who knew how to fight, and they worshipped Artemis, which of course now wouldn't surprise us because, right, she's a warrior goddess. It's fascinating to me that the Athenians had Athena dressed in armor, yet she doesn't fight. It's a weird kind of thing, right? It's more like symbolic, where Artemis is out there in the wild hunting, using her weapons, let's say. In fact, now that I just said that, I think Artemis may be the only Olympian goddess female that uses weapons to kill.
That fights, yeah.
Yeah, that
you're
fights.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Athena, I think, is more guile. I think she's more trickster. She's on Prometheus' side. So she tricks the enemy. She comes up with strategy. She comes up with ambushes, to help the
Yeah.
Athenians.
He's
But
a politician. I mean, yes, okay, when they have the wars, when they have the wars with the giants, or they have the war, everybody fights in those. But yeah, I think I'd say Athena definitely becomes more of a politician, more like a Supreme Court judge, over time.
yeah, and for the audience, the most famous Artemis in our culture has not gone away. That's Wonder Woman. She's based
That's
off
right.
of Artemis, Diana.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yes, because then the Romans loved her so much, right? That
mm,
they take her from the Greeks and turn her into Diana. Although they do lean her more towards the moon and
mm,
Selene. They kind of, I don't know. They lessen her fierceness a little bit. But they actually spend a lot more time in like the darkness mystery of the moon, in moon mysteries. She's in charge of a lot of that. So I guess that was something the Romans were really. So Diana does a lot of that kind of work. Yeah.
Yeah, they got her an agent, PR agent.
well, they need to make Wonder Woman reboot her closer to Artemis, and she'll be like
Yes.
cutting people's heads off and slicing people. She'll be more like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the old movies, just killing people. And some question are asking, what about the idea of virginity? Was she a goddess of chastity? Because, for example, virginity was sometimes a honorific title. You're a complete woman. Isis is called a virgin. Aphrodite has been called a virgin in the Gnostic Gospels. Barbelo is a virgin, but she's giving birth to all these aeons every 5
Yes.
seconds. Was
Yes.
Artemis a real virgin, or was it a title, or is it
Hmm.
complicated? I mean,
It's kind of complicated, and I just finished for Pride Month. I did the gay gods of Greece, and
mhm.
I talked about how Artemis may have had female lovers, that her nymphs and her entourage, which is all women, may have been female lovers. The Greeks would not have counted that as sex, as they were very big on.
Penetration and
Thank
yeah,
you.
who's on top? Yeah, it was all domination. Like when I
Yes.
see my two
Yes.
cats that are neutered, but sometimes they get in a fight and one has to dominate. And the
Yes.
Greeks and the Romans were that way. It's like who's on top, who it wasn't really about. It's not about sex. Yeah, it's a
Yes.
different form of consciousness, right?
Yes.
So you're
Yes.
right. So two women probably wouldn't even register.
No.
in their-
No, no, no. And so yeah, I mean she's called Parthenos. I mean, like you said, they all are called Parthenos. And it's unclear. I mean, there's lots of debate in scholarship of whether this is a pious term, so a virginal woman would also be a pious woman. So a woman that's not married, a woman that remains in the faith, in the spirituality, whatever. And so in that way, yes, Artemis remains a virgin because she never gets married to anyone, and she's virginal in that way. But I think like biologically, like hymen wise, like if we're looking at that, I don't know that the Greeks really cared that much about that. It was more about like being married, belonging to someone. Then you are no longer considered virginal, and so that's how all these women are virgins, and yet they are able to push out babies because they're seen as pious, as sort of, I don't know, higher than normal women or men. There's like an honor. It's like an honorific title. Yeah,
But in some sense, she does have a boyfriend, like Orion, and so
that's right. She
it
does fall.
doesn't
Oh,
last
really?
long. It's more of a
No,
like one of those 50 tragedies or something. The
no.
man dies. The man dies. So.
Yeah. It doesn't last long. And as far as we know, there's no, as far as is written or what we have, there's no intercourse that happens. I mean, yes. So the only option for her would be Iphigenia, who she loves very much. Callisto in the story, when Zeus seduces Callisto, Zeus disguises himself as Artemis, and Callisto goes willingly, and they have
Mm,
this sort of affair or the beginning of a seduction or whatever, a sexual relationship before Zeus reveals himself. So this would tell us that Callisto would have seen nothing wrong with being intimate with Artemis. You know what I mean? In reading that,
right.
why would Zeus become Artemis to seduce her? It's an interesting choice, you know. So she may have been intimate with her female entourage.
Yeah, let's not get into the head of Zeus. We need Freud or somebody to deal with Zeus's psyche. He needs help. Lots of help.
Yes, yes, yes.
Didn't know Zeus was a cross-dresser. How do you like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Zeus in drag.
yeah, Zeus in drag. I mean, Zeus has done every form possible, from like a golden shower to a swan and then to his daughter. I mean, it's just creepy in this really weird way. But for me, what's fascinating is that he's successful. Callisto is very willing to be intimate with Artemis, of course, before he reveals himself. And then she's horrified and tries to run away from him. And of course, he had impregnated her. And then there's all this sort of devastation, and Artemis gets pissed off. Now, does Artemis get pissed off because she's jealous? Or does Artemis get pissed off because, Callisto had sex with a man? Either way, we're told that either Hera or Artemis, someone, ends up killing Callisto and turning her into a constellation. So I don't know. There's some hints in there that there was intimacy, but I mean, the Greeks would not have said out loud, so-and-so has sex with so-and-so. They had loved that language where they're like, so-and-so fell in love with, like when Poseidon falls in love with Peplos and takes him up to Olympus and loves him dearly. Like, yes, okay, we get it. We know what happens, or Zeus and Ganymede, who takes him up to Olympus and has him in his bed. I mean, that's a little more obvious, right? Like, but they don't write about the intimacies of women. They really don't, unless a woman is like cheating on her husband or doing something that's like, so we don't know. We don't know.
We just don't. Well, Vance, any super chats? I think I saw one from
Yes,
Chester.
we do. We have Chester want to know, is Artemis a bit Lilithy? Is he kind of, what's the relationship between Lilith and Artemis?
I love that question.
Feeling, right?
I thought, man, that could be a new word. Are you Lilithy tonight?
Yes. And the answer, the easy answer is yes, absolutely, Chester. I would say that Artemis is definitely Lilithy. I think that Lilith is portrayed as sort of more of a sex fiend, especially with Adam and her unhappiness with having sex with Adam because he's terrible. And of course, nobody likes Adam anyways. The dude is a douche. So, but I think that there's definitely like characteristics that are similar, and like the rebelliousness, the fierceness, when God is like, hey, you know what, maybe like have sex with Adam the way he wants. And Lilith is like, yeah, I'm out of here. See ya. So I think that would definitely be something that Artemis would do, especially since, like I said, when she's young, she sits on her dad, when she's little, she sits on her dad's lap and goes, so now you're going to give me this and this and this. So there's this kind of.
And a Porsche and a keys to that house.
You're going to give me all the things. And, and I don't think that there's any other goddess that demands stuff from her father in that way. So yeah, I think that there is definitely Lilith. I mean, arguably, I don't know who would be the initial divinity. Lilith is very, very ancient, right? I mean, she goes back to Inanna and Ishtar and Ereshkigal and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose that there's an ancestor of Artemis's in there somewhere as well. So yeah, so they kind of have a similar beginning. Yeah.
Of course, Artemis is not associated with the demonic the way Lilith is sometimes said to be.
Yeah, I mean,
That's not there, right?
Yeah, unfortunately for Lilith, she really gets a bad rap, and she's said to be the queen of demons, but that's a much later, interpretation. I mean, she parties a lot. She has a great time.
Artemis doesn't party either, right? I mean,
she does. I think she does. I mean, so sometimes she's associated with Dionysus in the wild. There's a lot of that overlap with her and Dionysus. Yeah, so there are lots of instances where women in plays and different pieces where women are in the wild, in the woods, celebrating Artemis. We don't know what they're doing, but they're acting wild, they're being wild. Dionysus is more popular because men are writing, so they're writing about him more, but also because he's got the maenads. So the maenads and the antlered women are very much an overlap between Artemis's deer culture and antler culture, and then Dionysus's cultures. So there is some mystery there between the two, for
You think
sure.
if she got drunk, though, that somebody'd write about it, Like, was she a
I don't
mean
know that
drunk?
anyone would dare. I don't know
Right.
that anyone would dare.
Was she
And if
happy
within
all of a sudden? She put down her bow and let down her hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. And yeah. What I wanted to ask you too is Apollo. I think you're right. That's what I'm trying. It's fun to put the pieces because obviously we were talking before. I've never been a fan of Apollo. Again, the quarterback jock, popular guy. Why was he associated with Artemis? Simply because he had the sun and the moon. But at the same time, I agree with you. Apollo kills the python, the serpent, and that's how Marduk killing Tiamat, Yahweh kills Leviathan. I see it as this big symbol where the serpent is these ancient animistic more female, where you had a priestess kind of culture, Ashira, the culture of Ashira. And these gods represent reason, civilization, the roads, everything. So, of course, when you have civilization, as I say, two things have to be sacrificed: nature and freedom. You have to have slaves. And when you sacrifice nature, you have to oppress women. I hate to tell people, but that's civilized. If you want a civilization, we're trying to find a solution with these goddesses coming back. So so you agree with me, Apollo is kind of this turn into civilization, solar powers, left brain thinking. But do you think they sort of threw Artemis there so they could have their cake and eat it too? Like, we can have nature and still worship her, but she's under control of Big Bro.
100%, 100%, 100%. And so funny that you say that. So tomorrow I'm recording this Apollo Sucks. Why does Apollo Sucks episode? And it's funny that you say that because one of my pet peeves that I'm talking about in this episode is the fact that he kills the python. And no one seems to be like, then he calls his oracle priestess the Pythia. I mean, the nerve, right? Like, I'm going to slay the python, and then the oracle is going to be called. Anyways, yeah, I have a lot to say about Apollo, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that so Artemis predates Apollo. There's very little doubt about that. And Apollo, yes, absolutely represents this movement, this patriarchal movement into left brain thinking, into the enlightened, that sort of idea.
We'll get roads and the trains will run on time and clocks will be okay, but
That's right. That's right.
mechanical.
That's right. And I think she is given to Apollo because it's the only, I mean, she couldn't be married off. I think that would have been much too treacherous. She didn't have children. And even as a mistress of animals, there's no children, there's no partners. So I think sister plays it's that boundary line. It's like, well, she's with Apollo, so she has this masculine, I don't know, part or whatever, carrying around. And he's a younger brother, right? And she helps him get born. Okay. In a way, she kind of mothers him, So I think that you're right, that gets her under the umbrella of, we are now restraining her to some degree, to the best degree that they could.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think her followers across not just Greece, but that area would not have handled her being married off, or
No,
there's ways if you marginalize her too much, they would have risen up.
that's right.
But this was almost perfect, putting her up there with the sun, the moon, the great god, and so forth. So
It's interesting.
Well played, patriarchy.
Right,
Well
right.
played.
It's interesting because in the temples of Artemis, there's no Apollo, but in some of the temples of Apollo, there's Artemis. So it's kind of interesting. And so, yeah, he needs her more than she needs him, and I'm not sure she likes him, to be honest. There's no real mythology around their relationship as brother and sister. The only thing they do together is kill some people. Other than that, you know, there's very little, like it seems to be a not the most loving relationship of brother and sister, right?
Yeah,
Or they
yeah,
irk each other or things like that, right?
yeah.
So
I think somebody had a quote. So mostly men are left brain materialists. No, that's not it. I think I remember talking to a scholar. He talked about Hesiod's theogony. You see how Greece, the gods started, and all the gods are like party animals. Zeus is having sex with men, even, and
yeah,
everybody's wild and crazy. And as the theogony goes, everybody starts getting more conservative. The gods get up to Olympus. Everybody starts getting in a hierarchy. I think it has to do with what society, some it was decided that this civilization would be, whoever made these decisions, and these sacrifices were made, again, nature, slavery, women,
yeah,
and the Greeks decided that's where we're going to go. And here we are 2000 years later. When I talk about these things, I'm not talking feminism, masculine. I'm talking about anima, these energies within us that need balance so that humanity can have balance. Because if we don't have
absolutely.
balance, we're
Yeah.
going to end up extinct. I mean,
Yeah. And, I always say, like, so when I say patriarchy, I don't automatically mean men, because I think patriarchy is definitely like a political hierarchical structure. And then there's women that are in patriarchy as well, and men that support. I mean, so I think patriarchy, we think of it sort of as an authoritative framework that actually oppresses many of us, men
mhm.
and women, because it's not doing any good for any of us. But I think patriarchy started categorizing masculine and feminine. And so all of a sudden now men can't be nurturing, or men or women can't be hunters, or it started doing this division, and that's a power play, right? And so now we're here under patriarchy for 2000 years, and we're trying to figure out, and because I think men were in authority for so long, it's often the blame goes on those men.
Mhm.
um, but I think it's definitely a system of power in which both, biological, both genders, let's say, participate in,
Yeah,
unfortunately for everyone, right?
I agree with you, and it needs to change. I mean, some of these great gods, again, Dionysus, Artemis, Hermes, these gods we need to know, they're always very androgynous.
Yes.
They are complete. They
Yes.
can handle all these energies, nature,
Yes.
reason, logos, wisdom. So that's what we need to be. The hermaphrodite that Zeus was afraid of in Plato's Republic. That complete human being.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly. Oh, and here's another thing. Yeah, because there was a study at the University of Chicago, and I believed it, but when I read it, but you know that in history, most wars are started by female rulers. So
Yeah.
again, that's very Artemis. It's like
Interesting. Yes.
people are like,
Yes.
men like to go to war. No, no, no.
Hmm.
It's, Queen Elizabeth, Tomir. It's female
True.
nobility will start a war 60% over 40%. So
It's true. It's true.
Artemis is still with us.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely, so it's that structure, and that patriarchal structure teaches us like things like territorialism and, right, like greed and hierarchy and militarism, like that kind of idea of like, you do as I say, you must obey. And so yeah, but for me, interestingly, Artemis is that perfect human, like we talked about, that complete, because she has the fierceness, the bloodiness, but then she cares for children and she
Mhm,
protects people. And so it's like she's got that combination of wrathful, if need be, like nature,
mhm.
and then kind and generous and nurturing. I guess also like Mother Earth, in the sense that she feeds us and holds us. And so I think she has that sort of if we can divide it into masculine, feminine balance, Artemis. I'm not sure that the others have a similar level of balance as she does,
Mhm.
you know. Even all the Olympians, male or female, I don't know that well, Dionysus, like you say, Dionysus plays a very good role. Hermes as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
For sure, for sure.
yeah.
Do you have a little bit more time? We've done a little over an hour. I have a few more questions, and it's
No,
fun.
no
I'm just
problem.
kidding.
Yeah.
This is again. I feel this is a ritual of sorts. And Vance, do you have a question, or anybody from the
Um, I don't see any questions in the audience that we haven't covered, although I could have missed it. I don't have any questions right
Well, I do. Can
now.
we talk about The Lion King, a movie we both dislike?
Uh,
That you bring up in your book, Carla.
Where should we start with the Lion King?
Well, first, who wants to worship people that eat you? I mean, talk about The Lion King is a great symbol of today's culture because we will vote for politicians who will drain our resources and send us to die in war, and they eat us. And The Lion King is like, why are you paying these killers? The other thing too is I think you were talking in your book about lion and lioness, and the truth is the king of the jungle is not the lion. That's the big trick. It's the hyena. The hyenas really rule. Most of the lions, when you see them eating, they've stolen it from a hyena. And the hyenas really rule the jungle or the country. They have highly intelligent. They have a form of communication. They're amazing animals. And in the hyena, the female is actually larger than the male.
Yes.
She's the
Yes.
dominant one.
Yes.
So I think that's another about how we've gotten it all wrong. And in fact, even people talk today, oh, Mithras, it was only men, the cult of Mithras. Like, no, they had a hyena order, these very fierce women that
Yes.
would
Yes.
fight.
Because
So
hyenas are a matriarchal animal, right?
yeah,
Like the females rule the pack.
yeah.
And the females do all these like crazy things the males are submissive. Yeah.
And it works, but again, this is a very left brain animal, highly intelligent. They love communicating, strategizing. They just completely outsmart all the other animals. So
And don't you
yeah,
find it fascinating that in the Lion King they're made to look like cackling women, right?
just
Right?
crazy. Yeah,
The
kind of
cackling
crazy.
witches. It reminds me of Macbeth, of the cackling witches around the cauldron.
Yeah, it was
They're
Whoopi
voiced by
Goldberg
women,
and
right?
Cheech Marine. I forgot who else was playing them.
Whoopi Goldberg plays one of them. Doesn't she play the maid?
She
Yeah,
plays a hyena
she
in the
plays the main
cartoon one.
hyena.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And even the lion, the lion drives me nuts when people are like, oh, the lion's the king of the jungle. And I'm like, the lion does nothing. He does nothing. The lionesses, I mean, try and get in front of a lioness when she's hungry. They hunt, they bring so they're the lionesses are the providers. They're the lion sits around. Maybe he plays with the cubs, maybe. And if there's ever an incoming lion, his job is to yes, fight that one lion off. Wow. Wow. So I don't know how many times an incoming lion shows up. Once a decade, I don't know, once every 5 years.
Hey, I want his job. What are you talking about?
The rest of the time he just kind of lounges. And while he may be the king of the jungle, I mean, the male lions would not survive without the lionesses just like massacring, buffalo or antelopes or whatever it takes. Some of those hunts are just incredibly violent, right? People are like, oh, the female is naturally nurturing, and these lionesses are taking down the buffalo, like shredding him to pieces. The lion's sitting at home, going, oh, thank you for dinner,
Where's my beer?
Yeah. And in that film, there's first of all, of course, it's Disney, so we can be here for hours talking about the way Disney indoctrinates our society with gender roles. The mom, Simba's mom plays a very minor role. And all you see is the masculine, tension, right? But you're right. The way the hyenas are represented, very clear, like cackling women. And they are a matriarchy, yes, but you're right. They're a very strategic animal. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a dream of having a pet hyena later when I have too many animals, but I hear they're the most amazing pets. You can domesticate a hyena because they're
Wow.
so smart. The other question too I wanted, which I think is very important, is Artemis associated with the bees. Could you
Yeah.
explain? Because the bees is actually the great symbol of resurrection, life and death, the afterlife. How did
Yeah.
she get associated with bees?
So bees and honey are an animal of the Aegean and an animal of the Middle East and an insect of all of that space. So all of those cultures observed bees, collected honeys, had beehives, and in their observations, let's say if we're talking about the Greeks, they realized that bees can be prophetic. They can predict the weather. they saw bees as virginal because they didn't see any intercourse happening between bees. So they didn't really understand how they saw that there's a queen bee, so there's a very clear goddess association. And of course, the idea that honey was made fermented into something, a kind of hallucinogen that you would take in order to prophesize. In fact, the Pythia at Delphi used to have this sort of fermented honey incense that she would put under her body. She would kind of crouch over it as the incense would go into her wuha and into her body and give her a kind of a high in which she would be able to prophesize. That and the methane gas that's, of course, under Delphi as well. Yeah. So bees become associated with Artemis, particularly in Ephesus. So the hunter goddess of the Greeks is not as associated with the bees, but the Artemis of Ephesus, which is another long story. We could probably do a whole episode on Artemis of Ephesus. That is where you see a lot of bee imagery. And it is my argument that the bulbs around her body are actually beehives. And she has bees coming up her body, and she's called the queen bee and all this kind of thing. And so because of that, Artemis is often associated with bees. By the time she becomes Diana later on, the bee symbol remains. The bees are seen as sacred, wise, all of those kind of things. Always been respected. Bees are, intelligent insects. And so, so as she becomes associated with bees, it just sort of takes over as part of her worship. And then honey is part of her worship. The honey cakes, the honey deer cakes that they made to save the boys. I was going to say from the Corinthians, but who were being sacrificed. So there's a lot of honey in the food that was offered to the gods, particularly to Artemis. So that's how she becomes more and more associated with bees.
And what about the priest, the Melisai? Is that
Melisai, which is another word for bees. So her priests were called Melisais.
The females, because some have said the males were called the Essenes. I don't know if
some of the males were called the Essenes. Yes, exactly.
Oh wow! What a connection!
Yes. That's an interesting connection that no one has yet really set in stone. I remember when I was an undergrad asking some of my supervisors who were into biblical studies, what is this Essenes in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Essenes for Artemis? And they don't know. So there's like a disconnect. So like we see them here and we see them here, but there's no evidence. So you and I can say, well, there may be connections, but there's a missing link, right? Yeah. But it's interesting, right? That the priests of Artemis are called Essenes, and of course the women are called the Melisai. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls are the Essenes. And I'm sure there's a lot of overlap over some of those festivals and some of those beliefs. So it's kind of fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so much. And why don't we talk about the connection of Artemis and the Virgin Mary? Obviously, the big one is Ephesus, is where I believe John and the Virgin Mary died, or she either ascended or died in Ephesus, right? So
that's right.
There's already that kind of connection, as probably, as you write, Artemis is slowly starting to be phased out. Her temple is starting to be degraded, and so of course the Virgin Mary comes. And I didn't know too. There's another sync. I was reading the Acts of John, and I'm like, oh my God, Artemis appears in the Acts of John, in that Gnostic text where I think John is trying to her temple, her altar breaks in half, and everybody worships Jesus or something like that.
Yes. I mean, so Artemis in Ephesus is a power force on her own. She's very different than the Greek Artemis. And there really isn't yet, and this is what I'm working on now in this new book of Artemis of Ephesus. What is the connection between the Greek Artemis and the Ephesian Artemis? There isn't really a direct line. It's sort of an overlapping line, like sort of layered. But she becomes a force to be reckoned with in Ephesus. I mean, she has the largest temple, one of the 7 wonders of the world.
That should tell you something. She wasn't just another.
That's been rebuilt like 3-4 times, you know what I mean? Until it's sacked in the 200 and something. So, Powerhouse, lots of festivals to her, an entire month to celebrate her. You know, she's this primary deity. And the Ephesians would celebrate her the way that Christians celebrate Christmas, you know, like it's that on that scale. Their identity is tied to that. And then we're told that John settles in Ephesus and that he brings Mary, the Virgin, with him as a possibility. So there's only two places Mary, the Virgin, could have died, either Ephesus or Jerusalem. But in Ephesus, there's now a house to Mary, right? And it's right near walking distance to the Artemis temple. Coincidence? I think not. Yeah. And we are told that John and Mary live in this house until Mary passes away. And this is where she's carried up to heaven from this place on, whatever. And so then, but it is also in Ephesus that Mary becomes Theotokos, which is, of course, Mother of God. And this breaks Christianity in a sense. Well, it breaks the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. It splits them. But this debate over what, you know, the incarnation of Jesus and the, you know, God being Jesus or Jesus being God, blah, 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 it is a big fight, right, in early Christianity. And the fact that Mary is labeled Theotokos in Ephesus is not an accident. My argument is that the Ephesians had a goddess, a powerful goddess there for so long that they decided, oh, here's Mary, and clung, like in this new religion, here's Mary, and clung into her and like fought until they finally named her Mother of God, which really places her in deity category, right? I mean, the body that carries a god, you know, is a godly body, right? You know? Right? So, and then she takes on these attributes of not the fierce attributes, you know, although she is the only person to ever yell at Jesus in the book when they run out of wine. I mean, I suppose that's a little fierce, right? He's like, yo,
we're running out of wine.
What's going on? Make some more wine, you know.
It's not my time, woman. In an Italian accent. It's not my time.
Turns around and he's like,
no, Mary wasn't Italian. It's like, hey, I told you to bring more wine. Did you listen to your mother?
With Jewish accent. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and you can just see Jesus rolling his eyes like, Mom, it's not my time yet. Like, hush. Right. So I guess there's a little fierceness in that. And of course, there's a lot of Catholics that worship Mary in where they feel that she protects them, protects women and men, children. Right. I mean, I grew up Catholic for a long time. Mary was my boo. You know, and so, but it's no accident that she gains that authority in Ephesus, which was already a city of one of the greatest goddesses in the world, right? Yeah, and then she takes on the milk and honey representations, of course, the virginal representations, all of those aspects of Artemis, the nurturing, the one in Ephesus, nurturing her people, the Queen of Heaven, all of those things Mary takes on from Artemis.
What was the link between the Greek Artemis and, you know, the Ephesian one?
So there's no real evidence of a particular link. I mean, so there are layers
name, right?
of, sorry? Well,
name.
yeah, but we don't know why so there's a lot of debate over the cult statue, because the cult statue of the Greeks is just her hunting in a short dress with dogs or deer. And the cult statue in Ephesus is a very ancient cult statue, more like Cybele. And so there, many scholars talk about, so there's an overlap in the sense of like, there's a lot of traveling in between, and then the conquering of the Ephesian space, of course, by the Greeks, later by the Romans. And so Artemis sort of takes over maybe where Cybele left off. There isn't like a start and stop point. The Ephesians become very attached to her in this form. And it's a very different form than in Greeks or in even Athens or whatever. And then you have these sort of parallel representations, one in Greece and one in Ephesus. They're the same, but different. Like, so it's a very interesting psychological thing that happens. But the Ephesians never represent her as a hunter goddess, never refer to her as a hunter goddess. She never carries a bow and arrow in Ephesus. And yet she is Artemis of Ephesus. So very, very interesting. And and complex. And so for me, I guess my argument is that she can really mold to whatever place she arrives in. You know, that's really the sort of the best argument with that. But who decided to do that first? When was she named that? That
How
stuff.
about
That
language? Was there what language was spoken in the Western Turkey at that point
so at
before the
that time
Greeks
it was a
got
lot
there?
of Greek. Yeah, it was still Greek. Yeah,
Still
very
Greek.
Greek. Yeah, yeah,
How
very.
about prior to that?
Prior to that, yeah, I don't know actually in Anatolia. So prior to that, it would have been maybe a type of Aramaic. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure
And
what
I'm
the
wondering, see, I'm trying to
official
trace
one.
back the name. How did the name, maybe the name in Aramaic or whatever language
So
spoken there
this is one
before
of
it
the
did.
arguments, yeah, is that her name may have been Aramaic. And there are people that talk about how her name may have different meanings in different languages, but no one has officially sort of confirmed where the name comes from. And so people go, well, she probably came out of Anatolia earlier with this name, maybe a goddess of the wild or like the mistress of animals or whatever. And then the Greeks liked the name and kept it. Perhaps. No real hard evidence about it, but lots of speculation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about the black meteorite of Kybele that then moves to the Virgin Mary? Is Artemis anywhere in
Yes.
there?
Yeah. So if you look up the Black Artemis, you will find that she is there in Ephesus, only in Ephesus, not in the hunter goddess depiction, but in the Ephesian depiction, especially during the Roman period, we have a sort of a black face and black hands. And actually, that really supports my argument that those are not breasts, because had those been breasts, they would have also been black, but they were beehives, right? But yeah, that idea of the Black Madonna and that meteor, the idea that black stone represents earth and soil and nurturing and mystery and darkness and all that kind of stuff, like good darkness, not bad darkness.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
That's right. That's great. Yeah, for sure. There is an Artemis version of that. Yeah. So again, you know, she really is goddess of transitions.
I think if you had advice why she's important today and her devotees, or again, however you see her, even as art or inspiration, that would be it. Like Hermes, she's the best chance we have of transitioning to whatever new age we are as a species, as a civilization, as an individual. It's good to have her on your side, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree. Yeah. And she encompasses both sort of the civilized world and the wild world, you know, and I think we've had enough of the civilized world and those kind of structures. So now it's more like, how do we
put it all bring it
how
together.
do we balance that? You know, how do we return to the wildness without a total systemic collapse kind of thing? And perhaps perhaps she's the guide, you know, in that, because she's able to be an Olympian, right? She's able to be part of the structure and yet also be apart from that structure.
Yeah, what a great lesson. You can be free in the middle of one of the most hierarchical, oppressive world, the Olympus, and you could still be free.
That's right.
So
Did she have a little chair up there, you know, like a lot of the gods did in the
She does
circle?
in movies. In movies, she definitely has.
Oh,
Yes.
that doesn't count. No.
They all give her a chair up at the top. So yes. Yeah. She has a seat at the table. Definitely.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, as we get closer, do you want to show us some pictures, or we can wait for your next interview when we talk about Artemis of Ephesus? Can't wait for your next book.
So yeah, I think we've talked about everything that I've got pictures of, as far as like the bear and the caves and all that kind of stuff. The only one that we didn't talk about, let me just pull that up and share it with you guys, is Artemis Bendis. So I don't know if you've heard of Artemis Bendis. So this is another fascinating, let me just see if I can share. So this is another fascinating incarnation. Yes, share, thank you. Of Artemis. Okay, hold on.
All right. As soon as I see the page, I shall put it there. Okay. I see a picture. Is this the one?
So yeah, so she's got a little dog here with her.
Oh.
Yeah. But the way that we know that it's Artemis Bendis is that she has this cap on her head. It's like what we call a Cypriot cap. So this shows us that she actually made it out into Eastern Europe and into the Balkans. So
Oh, wow.
once I'm done this work on Artemis of Ephesus, I'm going to be heading. So, I mean, I come from Eastern Europe, and I'm going to be heading out there to see this sort of hunter goddess imagery. And there's lots of stories, lots of stories. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Of Artemis Bendis, or a hunter goddess in the Balkan Mountains, in the Carpathians and things like that.
Wow.
So I'm hoping to find another connection to prove that she expanded even further northeast. So we have the sort of Middle East, we have Anatolia, got the Mediterranean and all of those geographies. And now we're going to go northeast a little bit too. And who knows where else.
Wow, that's very exciting. I can't wait to see that. So that's awesome. Well, I want to share just about I've got here your website. I wanted to share with the
Yay.
audience where people can go.
Yes.
ArtemisResearchCenter.com. Center with the European or the Canadian and English one. TRE. I'll have it in the show notes, of course. But for those of you, go to ArtemisResearchCenter.com and tell us about your site and what can people do and join. You talk about you do a podcast. Is that where you're going to
I do a
slam
podcast.
Apollo tomorrow?
That's right. Apollo sucks tomorrow. It's called the Goddess Project. So the Artemis Research Center is something that I started online last year, and I want it to be kind of like a cross between a school and some goddess travel and a few courses. So it's like a place of learning, mostly about Artemis, but also about other goddesses and things like that. But eventually what I would like to do is have an actual brick and mortar center and I would like to have it somewhere in Greece where people can come, and then we can almost do sort of reenactments of ancient rituals to Artemis, go visit some of her sacred sites. So it's really like my space. It's like the beginning, the foundation of my space for her. I really would love to like revive a place where people can come worship Artemis like in the old days. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to build a temple like in the old days. I mean, that's quite a feat.
Expensive, yeah.
Right? Even in Greece, that's quite expensive. But something that people can come visit, and that people can maybe leave things for the goddess, or say a prayer to, like. So I would like to build her. I feel called to build her something. And so I'm starting it online to kind of gain momentum, and then eventually I travel to Greece every year for research, and so eventually I will do something there. We'll see how that goes, and build something for her eventually. And so that will be sort of like a temple site and a school site and maybe a retreat site, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, very excited. Yes. And for the audience, her book, highly recommend She Who Hunts. You have some hymns, some are yours, some are from ancient writers. I'm going to use them in some of my summer rituals until, again, I'm not messing around with this goddess, or until the autumn goddess or a god decides to pick me for the next stage. But there's some beautiful stuff there. So highly recommend the book, and definitely check out her site for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's been grateful for the audience. Thanks for your questions. Good comments down there. A lot of smart things. Some of you got Chitico and got mad, but you'll live. But that's the internet. But Vance, thanks for keeping the wild hunt going. And
oh yeah, I love learning about this. It's more interesting than I thought it would be, and way more to it than I thought it would be.
I love that, Vance.
So thank you.
Yes.
And there's more. I mean, we probably scratch 50% of the book, and that's there's so much more with Artemis that you'll go down some wonderful rabbit holes. So
it's true.
And again, some of it will disturb you, but that's the whole point of nature. You'll be inspired, but you'll be horrified at some of the stuff that her followers and she did. I mean, that's nature.
Mm-hmm.
So
wild.
The
The
Wild
wild
Hunt.
child.
Well done.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well,
Yes.
Carla, thank you very much. I'm so happy we got to do this. We definitely want to get you back when your other book comes out or when you
Yeah.
want to share more. There's always room for Artemis here.
That's
So,
right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah. And if you have anything that comes up with hunter goddesses, antler goddesses, or bear goddesses, bears have become a bit of my fascination lately, too. I've had a couple of crazy dreams about them. And so I'm thinking, okay, what is going on?
oh. Have you
Um,
seen the movie Midsommar?
I have not wanted to
There
see it because I
there is
heard
a
the
bear. Well,
scene.
there is a bear sacrifice at the but you wonder the Scandinavians must have had something with the bear and
Oh, 100%.
rebirth and all that. Yeah.
There are old stories of bears marrying women and women marrying bears. Very, very,
Wow.
very ancient stories. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm doing all of that work and hopefully traveling some more. One of my goals is to like map all of her temples as well. Because one of the things that people, classicists didn't really care for is the temples of Artemis. And so we have some, but there are so many, especially like if you read Pausanias, he mentions so many. And so one of my
She was
goals.
a Starbucks of the ancient time.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And so I would like to visit some of these places and sort of map them down and be like, look, there's so many temples to her, more than we thought. Yeah. So
Mm.
we'll see.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, we look forward to your work. And yes, we didn't get to it tonight, but after the interview, I've got that evidence in that book where connects Artemis to Mary Magdalene. Maybe we can chat about it. I'll send you the information, the book, and
Okay.
it might work for you in your next book, or you might just say, bad scholarship. But I'll let you decide. I'll let you decide.
Thanks. Okay.
Well, audience, thank you very much. Hopefully, you'll have a good weekend. Audio version will be out next week. We will have a show on the Mystic's Guide to Self-Knowledge, to Gnosis, and some good shows. Gordon White's going to come on in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about the TV show Legion, how Gnostic and magic it is, and a lot of good shows. So thanks for your support. Thanks for being here. And everybody, have a good weekend. And as I say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.